Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. For years, rumors of Ramzan Kadyrov's failing health have circulated, and for years they were easy to dismiss. He always reappeared. Another video, another speech, another reminder that Chechnya's ruler was very much alive and very much in control. This time feels different. Kadyrov is still very alive, but visibly weakened, less mobile, less present. And as the image grows harder to spin, the question Moscow fears most is no longer whispered on Telegram channels, but discussed openly. Not whether Kadyrov will leave the stage, but what happens to Chechnya when he does. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Speculation surrounding the health of Chechnya's leader, Ramzan Kadyrov, highlights the degree to which personal authority and political stability remain intertwined in Russia's ethnic republics. Kadyrov's absence from a late December meeting of the State Council chaired by Vladimir Putin, together with his exclusion from official Kremlin photographs, quickly prompted reports in independent media that the Chechen leader had been hospitalized in Moscow. Kadyrov dismissed reports of his hospitalization as disinformation, maintaining that he is in good health. Videos released in early January allegedly show Kadyrov at his residence and later at the opening of a Quran school in the Ochkoy Martan district, with officials stressing that the footage was recent and unedited. However, his latest appearance with a cane and limited public engagement contrasts with years of carefully cultivated images portraying constant activity and physical strength. Reports suggest that Kadyrov has faced recurring health issues since at least 2019, with noticeable declines in his public engagement since early 2025. Furthermore, Kadyrov has taken official leave multiple times over the past year, an uncommon practice for a leader previously known for near-continuous visibility. In Chechnya's highly centralized system of governance, authority is closely associated with personal presence and control. As a result, even brief absences or changes in public presentation question the stability of leadership as well as Moscow's ability to manage one of its most tightly controlled regions.
And now, let's zone in on the East-Planning portion of our show. While questions arise about the state of his health, Kadyrov is positioning members of his family and close allies to assume power in key positions within the Chechen government. Here's a closer look.
On Monday, the Chechen leader appointed Ahmed Dudayev, the Republic's Minister for National Policy, as acting Deputy Prime Minister of Chechnya. Ahmed Kadyrov, the 20-year-old son of the Chechen leader, was also appointed as acting Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic. Ahmed Kadyrov will retain his existing roles as Chechnya's Minister for Physical Culture and Sports, as well as the Regional Youth Affairs Minister. The elevation of Ahmed Kadyrov fits a broader pattern. His younger brother, Adam Kadyrov, who only recently turned 18, already holds several influential posts. He acts as head of his father's security detail and secretary of Chechnya's Security Council. 18-year-old gained notoriety in 2023 after assaulting a detained teenager accused of burning the Quran, an incident that eluded formal investigations. Independent media has long reported that Ramzan Kadyrov, who has ruled Chechnya since 2007 with broad autonomy and loyalty to Moscow, may be preparing a succession strategy amid private health concerns. While Russian law does not allow for the direct transfer of power to family members, the growing prominence of Kadyrov's sons highlights how authority in Chechnya remains deeply nepotistic.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. For more than 15 years, Chechnya has not simply been governed by Ramzan Kadyrov, it has been organized around him. Power in the republic does not flow through institutions, laws, or predictable procedures, but through a single individual whose authority blends personal loyalty, family rule, private armed formations, and a unique relationship with the Kremlin. And that is precisely why the question of what comes after Kadyrov has become so hot. In recent months, that question has stopped being theoretical. Reports from independent Russian media, unusually consistent eyewitness accounts, and even the Republic's own carefully staged videos point to the same conclusion. Kadyrov is alive and unwell. He appears in public leaning on a cane, he has sharply curtailed travel, he now reportedly spends much of his time either in his residence or in medical facilities, including prolonged hospitalization in Moscow. Now, this is not the image of a leader preparing for a long political future. The Kremlin, for its part, insists on continuity. Kadyrov is formally approved to run again in the 2026 Chechen elections. His public requests to resign, repeated over nearly a decade, have once again been theatrically declined. The message from Moscow is familiar: nothing is changing. But this insistence on stability masks a deeper problem, because in Chechnya, continuity without Kadyrov may be structurally impossible. Unlike other Russian regions, Chechnya does not have a transferable system of rule. Kadyrov's authority rests on three pillars that cannot be easily inherited: personal fear, personal loyalty, and personal permission from Vladimir Putin. His security forces are loyal not to the state, but to him and his family. His political elite is not a bureaucracy, but a network of dependence, while his legitimacy is not electoral or ideological, but transactional. Moscow pays, Kadyrov delivers order. Remove the man and the system begins to wobble. And this is why succession in Chechnya is not merely a regional issue. It's a test of Putin's entire governing model. The Kremlin has long relied on personalized rule at the periphery, strong men who keep volatile regions quiet in exchange for autonomy, money, and impunity. Kadyrov is the most extreme version of that arrangement. The signs of nervous preparation are already visible. Kadyrov's children, very young adults, have been elevated at breakneck speed into formal positions of authority. His teenage sons appear alongside federal officials in Donbass, in the Kremlin, even abroad. Now, one of them now holds a senior security post in Chechnya. Yet, dynastic successions in Chechnya is deeply risky. Clan politics in the North Caucasus do not disappear simply because Moscow prefers order. Kadyrov has neutralized opposition not by reconciling it, but by crushing it. Without his personal control, those suppressed tensions do not vanish, they resurface. For the Kremlin, this creates a dilemma. Intervening too forcefully risks reigniting instability in a region once defined by insurgency. Intervening too weakly risks losing control altogether. And doing nothing risks a power vacuum filled not by loyal administrators, but by competing family factions and informal armed groups. Timing makes this even more dangerous. Russia is at war, and its resources are strained. The North Caucasus has always required constant political maintenance. A messy succession in Chechnya during wartime could be destabilizing. It could test the limits of Moscow's authority, and it would expose how brittle Russia's internal cohesion has become under prolonged personalist rule. Whether Kadyrov eventually leaves office through resignation, incapacity, or something more abrupt, the transition will test a system that was never designed to outlive its strongest enforcer. And for Vladimir Putin, that may be the most uncomfortable prospect of all. A reminder that a state built on personal rule eventually has to confront what happens when the person is no longer there. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Emil Aslan, a professor of security studies from Charles University. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
So first, can you help us illustrate how critical is Kadyrov's personal presence to the functioning of Chechnya's political scene?
Well, to an extent, it's very important because the whole power structure is based upon him. It's basically focused on him and his family and his entourage. Yet I think that if the transfer of power, when the time comes, when it's done in a sensitive way, then, it's not extremely important who is holding the power in Chechnya. The most important thing is to make sure that, whoever is in Chechnya has the back of Vladimir Putin.
Right, so essentially it will be like the similar power structure just transplanted with someone at the top of it. Are we looking at a more like a political dynasty with him already essentially appointing his son as the deputy prime minister and looking like he's about to just give him succession?
Yeah, I think that this is what Ramzan Kadyrov is looking for. This is what he would prefer, to just have some transfer of power that is dynastic. The thing is, we still don't know whether it's going to be in the interest of the Kremlin. So we have various scenarios, various interpretations of what's going to be happening in the coming months or years, depending on how much time is left to Ramzan Kadyrov because of his health issues. So the problem with Ramzan Kadyrov's sons, he has two sons who might become his heirs, is that they are too young. And according to the Chechen constitution, the law, formal requirements placed on the head of the Chechen Republic, you have to have, if I'm not mistaken, at least 35 years of age to become the head of the republic. Neither of his sons is of this age, so we can have various solutions to the situations. Either some other person is going to be appointed, a person who is very close to Ramzan Kadyrov, and some of his sons would be in charge, like informally. This is a scenario that was going on like 20 years ago when Ramzan Kadyrov himself was too young. So the formal power was in the hands of formal head of the republic, but Ramzan Kadyrov was still that was public knowledge that he was in charge of the republic. And the second scenario is that something is going to happen that would bring Kadyrov's dynasty to an end, and some other person would be appointed, like an ethnic Russian or someone else who would be heading the republic in the months or years to come. So both options are on the table at the moment.
All right, complicated indeed. And you also mentioned earlier that at the end of the day is whether or not Putin will be able to keep this power structure going, and it really depends on the Kremlin as well. Can you help us understand the Moscow's involvement of it, and why is it favorable to Vladimir Putin to have this sort of structure where everything right now essentially revolves around this one guy and this entourage?
Yeah, so it used to be extremely useful for the Kremlin and for Vladimir Putin particularly, because, as we know, Vladimir Putin came to power thanks to what was done in Chechnya. So this turmoil coming from the North Caucasus was something that brought him to power. He very masterfully used the situation, probably even created this situation back in we'll know about these bombings in Moscow, some other Russian cities in late 99. So this helped him reinvade Chechnya, and then very brutal counterinsurgency campaign was launched in 2000, in the early 2000s. And to make sure that there is this very effective counterinsurgency, he had to use some local proxies. So he created these Kadyrovцы units, this militia groups, basically counterinsurgent groups, meant by the Chechens themselves. A lot of them were former insurgents who were forced or who willingly switched sides and became allies in this Moscow's counterinsurgency campaign. So this whole hierarchy was built to make sure that Chechnya is occupied, that there is no further separatist movement coming from Chechnya. And this was quite effective, thanks to the brutality, thanks to the knowledge of intelligence of the social tyrann, of all everything that people under Ramzan Kadyrov did in the 2000s and early 2010s. And back then this was very necessary, but now we know that there is no organized insurgency left in the country. So I think that if someone in the Kremlin decides to discontinue this Kadyrov family's reign over Chechnya, I think it's going to be still working for most of the Chechens because there is no insurgency left. But one possible problem with that would be that, if there is a problem, if there is some stumbling in terms of this transfer of power, maybe some Chechens would see this as a window of opportunity for them to strike, because we know that, the custom of blood revenge is still alive in Chechnya, even though it's become a latent one, because people don't want to go after the enemies, particularly in the ranks of Kadyrov family, because they're gonna they're risking their entire families being wiped out. So a lot of Chechen families, hundreds if not thousands, that are waiting with this window of opportunity. The moment that Putin turns his back, or the Kremlin turns its back to the Kadyrov family, there is this chaotic transfer of power. And the moment the Kadyrov family is not backed anymore, there is this chaotic situation going on in Chechnya. I think a lot of people would think that this is the time for them to settle scores with their enemies, particularly within the ranks of Kadyrov's forces and the Kadyrov family. So this might create this violent situation under certain circumstances.
All right, this is typically seen when there's a power vacuum. It also invites instability, and that's how it might look like internally, but also curious about how it works externally. What risk do you think a power vacuum in Chechnya pose for wider regional stability for the North Caucasus?
Yeah, so if there is a civil war situation in Chechnya, I think it's going to have repercussions particularly for the neighboring republics of Dagestan and Ingushetia. So there is a risk, but it all depends on whether the civil war situation is going to be taken care of. A possible civil war situation is going to be taken care of effectively by Moscow or not, because Ingushetia and Dagestan are very different, and even though there might be some spillover to these neighboring republics, I don't think that they are necessarily interconnected. So if this insurgence, this possible insurgence, a possible civil war situation in Chechnya lasts long enough to kind of affect these neighboring republics, I think that they might be engulfed in violence too. But this is probably too speculative at the moment.
Do you think this succession dilemma also kind of reveal about the weakness of this Putin's broader system of like a personalized rule?
Yeah, so far it's been quite effective. We'll see what's going to happen next. So I still think that, my intuition, having studied the region for 2 decades, is that, there must be some kind of discussed scenario when it comes to this transfer of power. I think that, both Putin and Kadyrov, they must know what's going to happen next. I don't think they would leave this all to happenstance, particularly Ramzan Kadyrov. So I personally would say that the transfer of power is going to be quite smooth, but we don't know the details of it so far.
Well, have you observed any other kind of Russian region ruled by strongmen that you can draw some parallels with?
No, Chechnya is very specific. What's going on in Chechnya is unlike anything else we've seen in Russia and we see in Russia nowadays. So I think that Chechnya holds a very specific position in the hierarchy of Russian regions.
And do you think that this succession issue, if mismanaged, would cause any bigger ripple effect, perhaps not just regionally, but also in a geopolitical scale, or do you think this will be relatively limited?
Yeah, so if this whole thing is mismanaged in a very strong manner, then this might have a repercussion, particularly when we talk about some forced mobilization across Russia. We know that in specific Russian regions, people are not that happy in ethnic republics of Russia. We're not happy. Back in 2023, in Dagestan, some other areas with the forced mobilizations. So if everything goes the bad way, then we can expect something serious happening across Russia. But this is too speculative at the moment. So a lot of unknowns are still on the table, and if they all come together, then possibly there's going to be some general crisis in Russia. But this is not something we can talk about right now.
All right, definitely still a lot of speculation, and we'll have to see how things develop. But in the meantime, thank you so much for being with us on Eastern Express. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Russia's long-running demographic crisis is increasingly visible far from its major cities. New findings suggest that the country's rural decline is accelerating, with hundreds of villages formally disappearing as depopulation, infrastructure decay, and regional inequality deepen.
At least 266 localities were officially dissolved in Russia in 2025, most of them completely abandoned villages. The steepest losses were recorded in Kostroma and Novgorod regions, which together account for roughly 3/4 of all eliminated settlements. The Perm region ranked third, where authorities have also consolidated small, remote villages into larger ones to manage shrinking populations and infrastructure gaps. This trend contradicts Moscow's public claims about reviving the countryside, instead pointing to deepening demographic decline, spatial inequality, and the erosion of rural life beyond a handful of major urban cities.
Washington's escalating confrontation with Venezuela is reviving an old geopolitical question: whether Moscow sees Latin America less as a strategic priority than as a bargaining chip in its much larger standoff with the West over Ukraine.
Recent U.S. moves against Venezuela have renewed attention to earlier signals from Moscow that it might trade influence in the Western Hemisphere for freedom of action in Ukraine. Former Trump advisor Fiona Hill testified in 2019 that Russian officials informally floated such a swap during Donald Trump's first term. Now, following the U.S. capture of Nicolas Maduro, Washington is pressing Venezuela's interim authorities to expel Russian, Chinese, Iranian, and Cuban security personnel and sever economic ties, particularly in energy. Analysts note Moscow's muted response may suggest the Kremlin is prioritizing its ambitions in Europe over defending its foothold in Latin America.
A deepening water shortage is reshaping Uzbekistan's energy strategy, accelerating a shift away from hydropower dependence and towards renewables that place far less strain on scarce water resources.
Hydropower generation in Uzbekistan fell sharply in 2025 as water inflows dropped well below historical averages. Authorities reported a 20% decline in output, reflecting low river levels and depleted reservoirs. Uzbekistan's energy ministry said water availability was around 35% below long-term norms, limiting large hydro plants. As hydropower's share of electricity shrinks, solar and wind generation surged, more than doubling year on year. Authorities are now considering micro hydropower installations across irrigation canals to boost rural supply while conserving water.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.